Hello, everyone, and welcome back to A Better Life, New York. I know it's been a while since we did one of these. We've gone from assassinations to presidents to Bigfoot, and to keep with the interesting things that have happened over the years, we are flashing back to a great moment. I'd like to introduce my friend, Chris Piero Jr. He is a researcher, relentless researcher into our topic that's going to come over a few episodes, and that is a look back into the time and place of Son of Sam. How are you,
Great.
Chris?
Thanks. Yeah, so I got really interested in this during the pandemic. And I think a lot of people got into weird things during the pandemic. I opened up a book called The Ultimate Evil by Maury Terry, and I really just couldn't put it down. As a matter of fact, a mutual friend of ours is the one who recommended it. And, you know, I always remembered the Son of Sam through my mother's eyes. Not really so much my dad, but my mom, because I think most women that were between like 16 and 25, it was almost in vogue, started dyeing their hair because of David Berkowitz and the Son of Sam. And when I guess in that summer there was blackouts, and she would tell me stories about how my grandfather, who I never met, was just looking all over the place for her. And it was just a really crazy time for her. And she'd
Well,
always look back on it.
it's funny that you bring up the blackouts. I was working at a department store, Martin's department store. It's not a business.
Yeah.
And I was working security at the door. When the blackout happened, the radio went off. Now, mind you, to give you an idea of how long ago this was, and we'll start to talk a little bit about the time in New York. I was working in New Jersey. I was getting paid minimum wage, which was $2.40 an hour.
Wow.
And I would work 4 hours for a night, and I would make $10 before tax.
Wow.
Think about that.
I know. Well,
So,
a
but
slice of pizza was 50 cents though, no?
that's true. And gasoline, well, gasoline was a lot in 76, but
Yeah.
not what it is now.
No.
But I was just 17, and actually the next year I started working at late 77, early 78. I started working in New York City, and from a dumb kid from New Jersey, taking the bus in and going to Port Authority and wandering around New York, especially in that area, Times Square area, was like a total culture shock. I mean, it
Yeah.
was riddled with pornographic theaters and drug addicts. And if you ever saw the movie Mean Streets,
Yep.
which is the first big movie Scorsese made him famous, Martin Scorsese, I mean, it may seem like a joke, but that's exactly how it was.
Yep.
And I worked on
Yeah.
Fifth Avenue, and it was interesting. It was like rich people and crazy people all in the same place.
Yep. Um,
And go ahead.
I think that's the most crazy. I think it's one of the most craziest time periods. Obviously, I don't, well, I'm not obvious, but I wasn't around back then. I wasn't even a thought,
Right.
but I
Right.
could only imagine being like a roach on a wall in New York City watching all of this. It's just, it's wild. I mean, you had the mafia was in it's kind of its heyday in a way, it was the late 70s in New York. You had, like you said, you had the wild and crazies. The sexual movement was going on.
It
People were
was,
putting like 5 cents to get like a peep show. Like, I caught the very tail end of that in the early 90s. We rode our skateboards to the Portchester train station and went down, and it was still some of that left over, but it wasn't anything like what it was
right.
back in the 70s.
Well, it's funny because I worked at Baum Teller in the city, which was an old department store. It's not there anymore. Donald Trump bought it and
Huh,
turned it into Trump Tower.
right.
So years later, when I met him, I said, I've always said I'd get back here because I lost my job because of you. And he just laughed. So anyway, he's a whole nother story. But um, I remember going outside for lunch, buying hot dogs on the corner, and there was a guy with his hair slicked back. And if you ever seen movies or something from the time he's in movies and stuff, he used to play famous drum parts on a 5-gallon plastic drum on the corner and tell you, this is Gene Krupa from 19. He would bang on this thing and people would give him money. And me and my friend, who was a stock boy in the store, would go and sit on the corner and listen to this guy play the drums on his 5-gallon drum and eat hot dogs at lunchtime. It was
Right.
just like a total different total different world.
And there was also a middle class Manhattan back then, working
Correct.
class Manhattan. And
Absolutely.
and
Construction everywhere.
and the boroughs were filled. It was I think it was you can make an argument it was more diverse, right? Because you had all types of different people living in different neighborhoods and so forth. And that's kind of changed about New York. But I think as a result of learning about the Son of Sam, I learned about how those neighborhoods kind of were, and it kind of reminds me of like the Westchester County I grew up in before it
Right.
became a super affluent, area to
Yeah.
be.
Well, New York in that time period, you make a really great point. It was all a bunch of neighborhoods. People knew everybody else who was in their neighborhood. They went to school together. They lived together. Everyone's mother knew their mothers on this block and that block. There was a relationship. And though the city was at its lowest financial point where it went bankrupt and it was bailed out by some real estate developers or something and some association. I mean, Gerald Ford, the famous paper where he said drop dead to supposedly to
Yeah.
New York, and Jimmy Carter was just coming into his to power as president, and he was going to help New York. I don't know if he ever did or not, to be honest. But you had this influx of street people,
Yep.
rich people, and as you say, a middle class of working union people like my dad was. He worked in a factory his whole life, and we're all cohabitating on a subway in the streets of New York in these places. And even in New York City itself, there were neighborhoods. There was the Village, there was Soho, Fifth Avenue, even
Yet Hell's Kitchen was
Hell's Kitchen, Madison Avenue. These were all places
Little Italy
that
was much bigger. I
Little
mean, it
Italy
was
was
it was
much bigger
a real Little Italy. There were still Italians in Harlem.
too. That is
I mean,
true.
it's like Pleasant Avenue still had Italians. Like it's not that
Absolutely.
it's not that New York City anymore. But there were a ton of murders back then as well. I mean,
Absolutely.
there was a lot of stuff going on, and it was easier to get away with things, right? We don't have AI, we don't have cameras at every corner, we don't have DNA evidence, we didn't have as
Yeah,
much of that then.
that
I
is
mean, maybe we
true.
had some stuff, right? But like,
There were no cameras anywhere.
and
And I
right.
remember I remember we used to go to CBGB's,
Yep.
and I had like a 1977, this is like a year after this begins, Pinto. And maybe I got it in 70 into 76, but a Pinto. And I would drive to CBGB's with my friends. We'd bring a case of beer, and there would be literally which was in the Bowery guys hanging out by a 55-gallon drum with wood and a fire in it,
Yep.
and drinking out of a bag. And I'd give them beer, watch my car, and at the breaks we'd go out and drink beer with them.
Yep.
It was a
I
different
lived in the
world.
Lower East Side in the early 2000s, and it, it's it was still coming up back then. I was either I was couch surfing at one place, I lived at another place,
Right.
but I was in that area between DNC on Houston and by Delancey Street, Orchard, Rivington, over there. It was coming up. It wasn't really that bad. There was still a lot of that old artsy stuff. I spent some time at CBGB. I was able to see that,
Later on.
and those are it was awesome. But Williamsburg wasn't Williamsburg at that time. It was
That's true.
still very, very, very gritty. And I wanted to get a haircut, and I had that, shape ups, fades, and everything. And my buddy was like, "You got to go to Williamsburg. There's these Puerto Rican guys that cut hair, amazing." But you get to Williamsburg, and it was just burning barrels everywhere. There was, a lot of, I think, auto body shops. Guys were fighting. It was a complete mess. And you turn around, here we are. It's in 2025, and it's the most yuppie place in America. It was weird for a little while, and then it got, it was like artsy, and then it just went full yuppie. And it's like,
Oh, yeah.
it's things just change very rapidly. And I guess New York City's always going to do that.
It is. It's fluid. It's fluid.
So
So that is the backdrop
yes,
for the beginning of this terror that grips New York.
right.
Because it's something I think no one is prepared for and no
No,
one foreseen. There's all kinds of, and you in those days, everything was on television, right? at that point, and there were these serial killers and things out in California. You had the Zodiac killer. You had these kind of things, but nothing like this in New York.
And honestly, the study on serial killers was still in its very early phase with the
Right.
FBI during that time period. It kind of actually really started, I think, right after that time period, maybe like like a little bit after in the late 70s and early 80s is where it really took off.
But it really kicks off with the Unabomber when they start looking at psychological profiles, which the
Yes.
FBI hadn't really done that to the Unabomber, and that's
They
how they found the Unabomber.
There were
So
two guys, not to call you out, but there were two guys, and I think maybe a female that was running a small program with the FBI. They actually interviewed Berkowitz. They interviewed a guy from Oregon. His name runs away from me, and a few others. But again, it was laughed at because
correct.
they couldn't, because I don't think there was an appetite to realize, maybe it was because there was still a lot of religion in society, and even in the upper ranks of a lot of these organizations, these government organizations, where they just couldn't believe that it was a mental illness that was doing it. Maybe it was just some sort of evil or whatever it is. But there was a somewhat deep study. The names of the people are running away from me. On the next show, I'll make sure I'm prepared with that.
Well, that that's a
But
whole
there,
nother story. So we're really just trying to paint the backdrop of the kind of New York City that existed
yeah,
when this happens.
exactly.
And it is a different place than it is today. And
I want to ask you this: was there also a sense of Camelot during that time period? Was there still a little bit of purity left in
no,
those neighborhoods, those middle class, working class neighborhoods?
I think that I mean, as a kid, people were still riding their bicycles in the neighborhood. They were still playing stickball. As
Right.
an adolescence, that still went on. Baseball was important. The Yankees didn't have their big year yet, still at 76.
Yep.
The Mets came off of 69, and they also were around at 73, where they lost when, but it was different, but we didn't know it at the time. You know
Right.
what I mean? You
Yep.
didn't really know it at the time. You sent your kid down to the corner store to get something that still existed. It was the beginning of that not existing anymore,
Gotcha.
actually. So,
So
you know,
everything.
you still had a lot of people moving out to the suburbs.
Yep.
You had this white flight that was going on all over that
Yeah, there was a lot of
routinely called,
racial
but
turmoil at that time too. Which we didn't.
absolutely. But what happens is unforeseen. The entire New York City Police Department is a different kind of department than it is today.
Yep.
It was fairly massive. You didn't mess with a New York City police officer. You just
No.
didn't. It
And
was
as
actually unheard of.
right.
What begins to happen is the financial crisis. Mayor Lindsay leaves the city with a disaster.
And then Beebe comes in.
And Mayor Beam, you have this big, tall, handsome guy in Mary Lindsay, who's Kennedy-esque, and in comes a little Jewish guy named Beam, and he's
Yep.
literally 5'6". He can't be more than that if he's even that. He's very short. So every news conference, you have, the fire department in those days or the police department was full of big, tall Irish guys, right? All the
Yes.
commissioners and all the things. So you have these gigantic Irish guys standing next to little Beam.
Yep.
Which was quite a picture at the moment. So
It reminds me of the big Irish cop from Pope of Greenwich Village. The one at
yeah,
the bar where he gives him the drink. That's kind of what it was like, right? I mean,
absolutely,
it's just,
absolutely.
so anyway, the whole Berkowitz Son of Sam saga really begins in about 76, the summer of 76. It heats up later on, and when the first shooting happens, it happens on a quiet night, July 29th, 1976. You've got two victims, Donna Lauria and Jody Valenti. Basically, two teenage girls in a parked car, and a man just fires a gun out of a paper bag. Donna Lauria is, killed. Jody Valenti survives. There's not much early reporting on it. It's obviously a, a terrible, a terrible case, a terrible, instance, but it doesn't make a ton of waves because I think there was just a lot of chaos in New York City at the time. We already discussed, I mean, serial killers weren't really a thing in New York, I guess, I mean, it wasn't something that people were thinking about, or scared of so much. I mean, there were other things to be afraid of. I think that's a fair statement, but there really wasn't much. The one weird thing that we find out uh, in this situation is there was a yellow Volkswagen seen in the neighborhood, and it's important that we talk about that, or at least highlight that when it comes to this situation.
Right. So here's two girls sitting in a parked car, fooling around, talking to each other in a neighborhood in the Bronx back then, and it's kind of at the time taken as just another shooting. Correct? I mean, there's nothing more than that.
It's just a shooting, right? It's kind of ambiguous. I don't know. I don't know if that's the right word, but nobody really knows why these two girls were shot at, right? Obviously, I could get into the face, more into the case files, later on, but the initial thought is, why would anyone do this, right? Not so much, like I think people were a little bit confused by like, why would two girls be targeted, right? What did they do?
And what's interesting, though it doesn't become interesting at the time, is that they're shot by a man using a 44 caliber pistol.
Right.
And that is unusual. Crimes don't usually happen with 44 caliber pistols.
You would know more about that.
Right. They're usually a 38. Today it would be a 9 millimeter more.
Right.
But 44 caliber is a powerful pistol.
Yes.
And it's not something someone usually carries,
No.
especially in those days.
And it's also, I don't think, a very accurate weapon, but that, I think, I'm saying tongue in cheek, so to speak. In this case, it works for the murderer.
Uh-huh.
Donna Lauria is killed. Jody Valenti survives.
And not that much is known. And listen, the trouble with when you have murders and things, especially the first one after a group, you don't know what's important, right? You take everything down, you be thorough. Police officers have a system. You never know what's important. So, and you'll see, and everyone will see as we go through these things, the police routinely on these cases go back all the way through the files to reinvestigate in this. And all right, so that goes on. Not that much is done about it, though it is assigned to someone, but it doesn't really start taking effect until they link it to the next one, which is in Queens, right?
No, I think there's actually one more that happens. There's actually two more that happens prior to that.
Oh, there are? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
you wrote Queens here.
Yeah. So
So,
basically what we have after that is we have Donna DeMacy and Joanne Lamino.
right.
Basically what we have here is the same situation. Two women, both are shot. Later on, after a couple of more shootings, they figure out that there's at least something happening here with a 44 caliber. But it's, again, two women shot, this time in a different borough. It's I believe November 27th, 1976. The attacks are going to raise concerns, but you know, it's in a different borough. It's two other women. I don't know if at that time the police department's really sharing enough information where they can put two and two together yet, is really the issue. Again, it's a horrific crime, but there's absolutely no discussion of a serial killer at this point. When we get past this, get to, I believe it's the De Niro shooting. And I'm going to just pull something up here because my notes, something happened here. So I apologize for that, Judge.
Yeah, no problem. So the next one on your list.
Yeah, I think I deleted something. But
Oh, you
this
did?
is
Because I
yeah,
thought there were two in the Bronx before there was one in Queens, I thought.
it's possible. I might have jumbled something up here and I did not realize it. Hold on one second, Carl. So I apologize.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
In October of 76, Carl De Niro shot. He is with Rosemary Keenan. I've done podcasts with Carl. I've had a drink with Carl. I've talked to Carl many of times. He's a great guy. This is a man that I think up until about 1992 or something to that effect, maybe even the late 80s, thought that David Berkowitz shot him, and it really was a life-changing thing for the man. He survived the shooting, but, there was things that he couldn't figure out. Why him? Why did he get shot? Why
Right.
why did the guy go after him? It
And this
was a
this took place in the Bronx again?
This took place in Queens.
Oh, the first one took in Queens. Okay, so the first one's in the Bronx.
Yep,
The second one is in Queens, and that is when you said September,
October.
October. So there's a good distance between.
Yeah, it's not it's like every other month, every 2 months, it seems like.
And
In any event, again, this is a random act. Guy shot at. I don't believe that Rosemary died. Yes, so Carl De Niro was number 2. Yes, that's what I did there, and I do apologize for that, guys.
that's all right. Go ahead.
The shots are fired into the car. It wounded Carl De Niro. His story about getting shot is kind of hilarious because he's making out with Rosemary Keenan. It's his last night in New York. I think he's going to go to the Air Force or something like that. And, all of a sudden, bang, right? A bullet runs into the car, goes into the car. He walked back to the bar and didn't realize he got shot in the head. He passed out walking into the bar, not in a car. He goes to the
Right.
hospital. He thinks he's getting out. They're like, dude, you're not getting out today. You got shot in the head, So this was unsuccessful for the murderer. And, there are some questions that raises later on. And it's something that's been looked at and looked at and looked at. What I could tell a lot of people about my conversations with Carl and Carl's conversations with people that were intimately involved in this case is that he does not believe that David Berkowitz shot him that night anymore. That I know. And, it's a really rough thing because the guy kind of just wants some closure. He's an amazing guy too. Funny, really enjoy his company. But, again, there's still no suspicion yet of there being any kind of a serial killer.
But this is the same 44, and they do link the guns together. Or they're not really looking at that yet.
They're not looking at it yet. There's another shooting after that. That's in
Um,
November
right, a
of
month later.
76. A month later, also in Queens. You've got 2 women shot, Donna DeMacy and Joanne Lamino. Joanne was left paralyzed. Again, you have the 44. It's a little bit different. These girls were not in cars. They were not in a car. There was no lover's lane scenario, which I think to an extent is overblown. But, again, you have another shooting in November of 76.
So where were they? Walking on the street, sitting on a bench in a park? What were they?
I think they were in a residential neighborhood, more or less.
Right.
And, guy just walks up, crouches down and shoots him. And that's it. And, the rest is history. Sirens start flaring. People are obviously scared shitless. Excuse my language, but, they're scared. And again, it doesn't appear like the New York City Police Department realizes really what's going on at this point.
Right. But it's the beginning of people starting to say, there's a lot of politics in New York City Police Department, especially during that period. And they don't want to scare the public. But there are some people starting to say, these murders are related.
Yes, I would agree with that statement wholeheartedly. I don't think that anything was made public, but I'm sure that there were rumblings within the police department saying we might have some sort of a madman on the loose shooting people for no reason. Because again, at this point, there's no real motive for any of these, right? You don't have a motive for Donna DeMacy and Joanne Lamino. These are teenage girls. What could they possibly be into that they're getting shot at? I would definitely assume because of the neighborhoods that they were in, Italian American neighborhoods, New York City, they're probably looking at, was this like a hit gone bad? Did somebody go and shoot somebody thinking it was a man that was supposed to that had a contract or something to that effect? You could say the same in Queens to an extent, but why are teenage girls getting shot, right? Why is a guy and a girl making out in a car getting shot? That one, it could, in some cases, it could be like, okay, someone got jealous, decided to shoot at the car and,
Absolutely.
Something like that. But, based on my research, nothing has been made public about there being any kind of a serial killer or madman on the loose at this point.
I don't think now the next shooting is January of
January 30th.
'77. Yeah. So
1977. This is where we start to see the thought process that there's a serial killer, because now the 44 is coming into focus. Um, there's a kind of an area where these are happening where they're like, okay, this is the same guy. And this deals with Christine Freund and John Deal. Christine Freund was a beautiful woman. John Deal was a handsome guy. I believe they were going to see a movie that night. They're parked in the car, and, you know, basically someone comes out of nowhere and starts shooting. John Deal had some very public interviews. Um, and you could just tell that guy was freaked out. I mean, just don't expect that something like this is going to happen to you, but this is 100% where they start to really say, okay, this is something different than what we're used to seeing. Right? Composite sketches are starting to get released, and now the detectives are really trying to track patterns. What happens next, in my opinion, and what kind of kept me up at night researching, which I think we're going to spend a lot more time on, is the Vosgarichian murder. This girl's by herself. She's walking home. She's not in a car. She's not making out with someone, and she's shot.
right. So this is in March of '77, just a
This
few
is in
months
March of
later.
'77, and it's, I think, 3 blocks away from the Freund Deal shooting. So it's right after, and it's right in the same neighborhood. I mean, we're talking, walking blocks, not driving, nothing to that extent. And, Virginia just, I think she died with a book in her face. I mean, he shot through the book. So, 44 caliber may not be the weapon of choice for a lot of people, but if you're looking to do some damage close up, it seems like it's the right gun for this type of style of killing, I guess.
Yeah,
Ultimately,
if you're going to shoot somebody in the head with a 44, you're going to do a lot of damage, and the want and will is to wipe them out, right? Is
yes.
is to is to erase their beauty or their acts or who they are, their identity, almost to an extent.
What I find interesting about this case is, this particular part of the case is, this was at a time period at night where there were a lot of witnesses. There were other people in the area that were seen, and it's the sketches that came out as a result of that murder look nothing like David Berkowitz, even in the slightest. There is someone in this that resembles someone who could be David Berkowitz, not denying the fact that David Berkowitz was there or not right now at all. I just want everyone to know that. But what I want to dig deeper in later on in another episode is the case file on this one, because it drives me crazy.
Right. So now we're what are we, five?
We're 5 months in, I think.
5 months in, how many murders?
Maybe a little
One,
bit more than
two,
that, actually. Sorry.
three,
Because it started
four.
July.
Yeah.
This is March,
So
so it's halfway
10
through.
months in, we've had multiple murders, all with the same gun, some relationships. Now, the sketches are, in my opinion, a little bit all over the place, and we'll
Yes.
see them as time goes on,
Right.
which gives the police officers and the mayor and others a lot of pause. Newspapers are wondering what's going on. Everybody's screaming, what are you going to do? How are you going to catch this guy? Blah, 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 blah. 1 month after Virginia, in April, another murder.
Yes. And this is the most haunting one, because the police are on high alert. They know that something is happening. And I believe this one was pulled off almost impeccably by the shooter. Both people are killed, I believe, more or less instantly. They did not stand a chance. And at this point, Berkowitz, according to the official story, is getting more brazen. It's at this point that he leaves a handwritten note at the scene. It's addressed to Captain Borelli, and basically it's a taunt. There's some cryptic messages. It sounds very much like a madman is on the loose at this point. Nothing is released to the public by this point either, but the look back is, okay, we got a maniac here,
And a maniac called the Son of Sam.
Exactly. This is the first time the Son of Sam reference or the reference to Sam is made. Again, nothing's released to the public, and I think that this made Berkowitz mad because he wanted to start getting credit for this, right? He wanted to see his name in the papers. He wanted to see his moniker in the papers. He wanted the public to be even more scared. And the most famous of all letters comes out very shortly after that, and that's to Jimmy Breslin, who seems like from the things I've seen, the footage I've seen of him, like the most interesting man in the world. Like a wild old school reporter,
Oh
kind
yeah,
of trashy, kind of
popular as can be.
yeah.
Daily News. He was with the Daily News then, I think, right?
Yep, exactly.
His son actually worked for me for a while.
So he gets the letter, I think, on May 3rd. There's a lot of arguments back and forth as to whether or not they should put the letter up in the paper. I'm speaking like someone in the 21st century. I'm acting as if they're putting up a Facebook post or a Twitter post. I'm sorry for that, but are they gonna publish this letter? And they finally do on June 7th, 1977. They don't do it in its entirety,
Right.
but they put a lot of it in the paper. And there are some key things in this letter that I think raise some concern about the overall case. And I'm just gonna read that off to you if you don't mind. In this letter, he refers to himself as Sam's creation. 44 here are some names to help you along. Forward them to Inspector for use by NCIC. In quotations, he puts the Duke of Death, the Wicked King Wicker, the 22 Disciples of Hell, John Wheaties, rapist and suffocator of young girls. P.S. Please inform all the detectives working the slaying to remain. Sorry. P.S. Please inform all the detectives working the slaying to remain. P.S. JB. Please inform all detectives working on the case that I wish them the best of luck. Keep them digging. Drive on. Think positive. Get off your butts. Knock on coffins, etc. Upon my capture, I promise to buy all you guys working the case a new pair of shoes if I can get up the money. Son of Sam. I think this is the point where people are starting to lose their mind.
You think?
Yeah.
It was crazy.
I could only imagine what it was like to be there during that time period, but
So my friends went in the city, and I don't know. I as I think about it now, I stayed home for whatever reason, and I want to say I wasn't. It was one during it after the height. It was full blown searching for the Son of Sam, and while they were in the city, Son of Sam kills someone or whatever. They're driving back, coming across the George Washington Bridge. The cops are stopping every car and searching.
yeah.
And there were some illegal contraband in the car. And the cops were like, "Don't worry about that. We're only looking for the guy and a gun.
Ah, yeah.
You guys can go." And I mean, I still have the image. The guy had like a 76 Thunderbird, like with the half vinyl roof on it. And it was a different era, but
Yep.
they were full court press. They were searching and roadblocks and looking to no avail.
June 26th. And I'll tell you what, I mean, he definitely taunts him in that letter. Back at it. Sal Lupo, Judy Placido, Queens, to a nightclub. They're walking out. They get shot at. They both survive. And at this point, it's a full court press to get this guy. We spoke about the upheaval in New York City at the time. Abe Beam's in an election year. He's got to catch this criminal. He wants to keep his job as mayor. People are freaked out. You already have people running from the city. You're losing your tax base left and right. It's a complete disaster. For the police, for the mayor, for the people that have to walk the streets at night. I mean, it's just not good.
Like you said, people were dying because he always seemed to shoot brunettes, but that's not what happened. He ends up shooting a blonde somewhere along the line. But
yeah,
blondes were dying. Well, brunettes were dyeing their hair blonde, or was it blonde dyeing their hair brunette?
It was brunettes going blonde, I believe.
Correct, because they thought that if they were blondes, they wouldn't get shot.
Exactly. Stacy Moskowitz, on the other hand, I think had blonde hair at the time.
Yes.
And that's the last killing.
And the most interesting one of the group.
I think it's probably the most interesting one in the group because there are a lot of timelines that just don't match up from the witness testimony. There are a lot of people out that night. I think the two key witnesses is Cecilia Davis and Tommy Zano. Tommy Zano, after the murder, Berkowitz was eventually caught, says that's not the guy I saw running through the park that night.
So this is July 30th. This is the last shooting, July 30th, 77.
Right.
So this is Moskowitz
Yep.
and
She's
and
killed, and
Robert
Violante.
Valenti.
Yeah, he Violante survives that murder. Survives. I believe he lost his eyesight. Again, they're in the car, they're making out. I think they're on one of those service roads off the highway. Bang. Yellow Volkswagen in the neighborhood. Car double park, gets a ticket. Cecilia Davis is outside, sees the man whose car has the ticket. The timeline doesn't match up for her when she hears the shots and when she sees this guy.
Right. She's
Tommy
walking her
Zano's
dog. She's walking her dog or
Yep.
something, right?
Tommy Zano's in the parking lot watching this basically. And, after Berkowitz is caught, basically says, that's not the guy I saw. He did go back and forth on that statement. There were other statements saying, yeah, it's the guy, whatever. I think people were freaked out. I don't know. I've never interrogated a witness. I'm not a law enforcement. I'm not a lawyer. I don't prosecute people. I don't know why people do that, but I guess at best, he's not a good. I guess at best, or at best, he's not a good not a good witness. I don't know.
Right.
I don't.
So
I don't know how that works.
The woman with the dog, what's her name?
Cecilia Davis.
So Cecilia Davis is walking her dog. She sees the car. I thought it got a ticket because it was by a hydrant.
Right.
I have the ticket in the other room, but I don't remember. So she sees the ticket. She keeps telling the cops, find the ticket, and that's the guy.
Exactly.
And they're searching. They can't find the ticket. Everywhere they look, there's no ticket, no ticket, no ticket. She swears there was a ticket.
Right.
Turns out a police officer had 3 days off and didn't hand in his ticket till after the weekend.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden they have the ticket.
Right.
Next thing you know, they're in Yonkers where the ticket was, where Berkowitz lives, and they're watching his car.
Right. It's kind of interesting, though, how they get acquainted with who David Berkowitz might be. So they figure out they've got a David Berkowitz with the ticket. I believe he even paid the ticket, which is wild. But they start making calls. They find out his number. They're calling David Berkowitz. They don't get him. They call the police department.
Right. And the woman, something about the woman that answers the phone lives next to him or something?
Exactly. So the lady that picks up the phone is a woman named Carr. Carr worked for the police department in the dispatch, I guess. I'm not sure if she was an emergency 911 or whatever, but she definitely, what I've learned about her is that she definitely had an affinity towards, the department. Her family owned and operated an answering service out of their house, which was on South Broadway in Yonkers.
Right.
But it gets a little bit more weird because her father's name is Sam Carr, and Carr gave the New York City Police Department an earful about the man that they were looking for, who had this ticket, who really at that time they only wanted to question him because they thought he was a witness. In any event, she says, we've had problems with this guy. You got to look into him. There's this, this, and this. A few months prior to that, David Berkowitz was accused by the Carrs for shooting their dog. Whether he did it or not, is up for question, and we'll examine that. But now, because of the statement she's making to the police, which is really a just by chance thing, they're saying we might have our guy. So on August 10th, they drive up to Yonkers to find their suspect, right? And they get him.
Yeah, but it's interesting how it comes down. They're sitting there watching the car. They go up and look into the car, and they see a rifle inside the car floor. And of course, in today's world, we would be like, where is this guy? Let's go arrest him. But this isn't today's world. This is 1976. So they go and hang out. It's not a 44.
No.
It's a rifle. So they go and hang out. Then there's another guy that they go and question him.
And he's giving them a load.
about the guy. He has a gun on him too.
He was
It's
an
also
auxiliary
not a
police officer.
44. He's a part-time Westchester County police officer or something.
Exactly.
But he's up Berkowitz's butt too. He doesn't like him.
Exactly. Now, there was some issues between them in the building. There's some accusations that Berkowitz was sending, wild letters to him and harassing him. There's a lot to be said about that, but, the police are at this point are like, we got our guy. And sure enough, Berkowitz goes to his car. They pull up on him and he's like, you got me. That's exactly what he said.
Exactly what he said, right?
Now,
excuse me.
We talked a little bit about, profiling. It was in its early stages back then. And, he gives them the exact story they're looking for, more or less. But the thing that gets really weird, and I think why some people have spent their entire lives investigating this and learning more and more about this, is the fact that, after this more or less open and shut case, you start learning about some of the players and how he got caught. Is, obviously they call the police station. Carr takes the dispatch. Her father is Sam, the guy that David Berkowitz is referencing. And you go a bit further, she has two brothers, John and Michael. John Carr was back and forth from Minot, North Dakota. He was an Air Force guy, druggy, definitely a wild man in his own right. And had a interest in younger girls. I wouldn't say he was a pedophile or anything like that. I'm not throwing that accusation out there right now, but in the letter to Jimmy Breslin, you have a reference to a John Wheaties car, or John Wheaties, suffocator of young girls. Okay. Then you have a reference to the Wicked King Wicker, but first you have the Duke of Death. Now that really shouldn't matter, but Michael Carr was a little bit out there, and he kind of was into his Russian heritage and nobility. And I know that I'm speculating here a little bit, but it appears to me, based on what I know about Michael Carr, that David Berkowitz is referring not only to not only to the father Sam, but also having or implicating in some way Carr's brothers, John and Michael. And, it's really the first thing that gets some people asking some questions. And this is where kind of the rabbit hole kind of starts,
I agree. The rabbit hole definitely starts when you start peeling away what you know. You start looking at all this, and I'm gonna show you some of those things in the video, either prior or after this episode. I'm gonna show you some of the sketches and the note and things, and it's up to everyone to make up their own mind. I mean, that's the way we look at all these things we dive into. And Chris has been looking at this for decades.
Well, yeah, I mean, now I'm into my second decade of looking at this.
Second decade,
but the thing is it's not only that, because I think that makes you peel that first layer off the onion, right? But
I agree with you. I don't want to go too into it because I want to save that for the next episode.
That's fine, but there are a couple other things that
you could
we need to highlight.
All right.
You got the two murders, Moskowitz and Vosgarichian, that there's some weird happenstance there, okay? There's a couple of different people at the scene, right? There's some confusion about who could have done the shooting, right? You have a witness saying, I didn't see that guy. In the Vosgarichian murder scene, you have witnesses saying they saw someone who looked a little bit different. The sketch doesn't add up. The sketch of the murderer from one of the witnesses does not add up to look like David Berkowitz. It adds up to look like someone else, which we'll get into in another show, but it goes a little bit deeper. You were talking about cars earlier. Cars, automobiles. Berkowitz drove a Galaxy. You have a Volkswagen Bug, yellow Volkswagen Bug. His was cream. The Volkswagen was yellowish orange or something to that effect. Looking at those two cars side by side, you cannot confuse the two in any way, shape, or form.
It's impossible.
Right. So you have that. And then, the other thing is, I think that in another world that investigators are going to take a little bit of a closer look at the case rather than open and shut it. But there was a lot of pressure on the brass at the police department, and the mayor needed a win. It was an election year. Putting David Berkowitz behind bars.
Right.
was a big win for that time period.
Well, we've learned that in all the murders that we've covered is, and I'm going to start calling it the assassination game in our next assassination look, which is probably going to be John Lennon. I mean, it really is a game. I mean, what happens is the powers that be need to pin it on someone and close the case. And whether that's because they don't want you to know who really did it,
Exactly.
or they don't really care who did it. They want to get it behind him because it serves no interest to leave the public thinking that they're not safe.
Exactly. And I think the only thing I want to underscore this all with is, and the one thing that I think has always kind of made me question what actually transpired is, and who was involved and why they were involved, is we do know a lot about serial killers now. We know that a lot of it is, to an extent, a sexual thing or something that gets them going in a way that, a normal person would never think about doing. But these
Well,
people,
sometimes it's they want to prove to everyone that they're smarter than everyone else.
100% accurate. But you don't see a lot of serial killers that are walking up to someone, shooting and running away. They
Correct.
kind of want to bask in that murder. It's usually a strangulation, it's usually a stabbing, and sometimes even way worse. And I don't necessarily want to get into all of those, but I think if you're watching this and you've watched, some late night television, you kind of know how these things go. And
But we have had like the DC
sniper.
sniper. We've had stuff like that too, where these people go around and they shoot into people for
Yes.
no reason
I agree
whatsoever.
with you, but I think they're far and few between. And I
I
think that
agree with you.
that's the key. So the things that I want to examine is I want to examine, a little bit closely the Moskowitz and Vosgarichian shooting. And I want to talk about some of the layers that were pulled off the onion, so to speak, when it comes to what the media, police, and investigators said about Berkowitz during that time period versus what world Berkowitz is actually living in at that time. Because they're two
Right.
totally different things. And, there's reason to believe that it's Berkowitz did not act alone or may have been acting within a group.
Right. So I think we could kind of leave it there unless there's something
Yes.
else you want to
I've
mention.
got nothing else I want to say.
I think here we are at a time period in New York where New York was still a little world of neighborhoods.
Yep.
Still, there was an innocence about what was going on. There was a huge financial crisis going on, and the city was going to go bankrupt if it wasn't already bankrupt.
Yes.
And there was a time of change. We were moving into a different world. Plus, it was 1976. It was the bicentennial. They had
Yep.
the tall ships. We had all
I didn't
kinds
know
of
that.
things.
I never
What?
thought about that. I didn't even think about that.
So I was thinking that was July 4th.
Yeah.
So that's in a very short time frame from the first murder.
Yeah.
Think about it. I mean, it's the same month. There was this glorious time where people were, the tall ships came into New York. Now that happens again and when Reagan's president in the 80s, but this is the 200th anniversary of the United States of America, which the original government was seated in New York City. So here you have this celebration with this financial crisis in the background, and all of a sudden, this lone gunman, serial killer, starts going around and shooting people and just enjoying themselves.
Yeah.
Out of recreation. Nobody is like, there's so many when you talk about a serial killer, as Chris did, a sexual connotation. Some of them are making out when he kills them.
Yeah.
They're couples.
Yes.
There's interesting, but some are not. And if you want to start, like he says, peeling away from the onion, it almost looks like there's two different mindsets, two different people thinking.
Yeah.
So we'll leave it there.
Yes.
I'm sure some of you are going to look up the things that we talked about. Hopefully, we have another episode probably coming in a week where we're going to start digging into the next stuff.
Yep. I'm
All
looking
right?
forward to it. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on with you and
I'm glad to have
talk
you.
about this.
Well, thank you all for being here and listening to us. Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
And we'll see you again next.
Thank you. Yeah. Next week. Yeah, it should work. Next
All
week
right,
should
cool.
work. Yep. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Take care.